All right, good afternoon and morning, actually, to all our veterans and active duty military out there. We appreciate the opportunity to lend some of our insights as military veterans and appreciation to those that have served and are currently serving. Brad Stewart here, Chief Logistics Officer for Redwood, and I'm here today with David Chillingford, co-founder of Everstream Analytics. David served with the British Army as a forward observer during his time in the military. And then alongside David is Kevin O'Meara, Executive Vice President of Business Transformation for Shaw Industries. So David served in a number of posts to include Quartermaster in the Army's 3rd Division in Germany. So great having both of you here today, and looking forward to diving in a little bit to that world of the military and that transition to the civilian side. So, being here with two fellow veterans is a great way to really take remembrance and notice really for our veterans on Veterans Day. Both David and Kevin have found great success in their civilian life after their end of active service, or as the military likes to abbreviate EAS for the U.S. side of that, David. So maybe tapping into Kevin first here. Can you share with our audience a bit about your military background and your journey to make logistics a career after your service?
Yeah, first, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it and always enjoy these conversations. My journey really started right out of college. I was an ROTC student in college, so I went into the Army, and I started off in the armor force. So I was part of the Army, running around in tanks for a while, and then when I went to the Officer Advanced course, had made a decision to do what they call a branch transfer and go into the Quartermaster Corps in the Army, which is essentially logistics and supply chain. And from there, I went to Germany. And as you said, I spent pretty much 5 years over in Germany, where I commanded a logistics and supply chain company in the 3rd Infantry Division. I managed the Port of Rotterdam during the first Gulf War when we liberated Kuwait. And then from there, part of the reason why I did that branch transfer is I had a sneaking suspicion that I wasn't going to spend my entire life in the military, and I did get out of the military and went to work for a big logistics company, mostly doing automotive logistics. Then I kind of went to the shipper side, I guess I'll call it, and I managed the supply chain for a large appliance company, a private equity distributor, and now I'm with Shaw Industries, and we're the largest carpet manufacturer in the world, and do quite a bit, all flooring, all things flooring. We do that. And so the journey really has been all supply chain and logistics in one fashion, form, or another. And it got me to where I'm at today, which is essentially doing the strategy and business transformation for our company overall. So really, that's what the journey's been, Brad. It's been all about supply chain logistics, and pretty much learned it all in the military, because when I was started in the military in the Army, there really were no colleges at that time that you went and got a logistics degree or a supply chain degree. So the Army ran what they called the Army Logistics Management College down at Fort Lee, Virginia at the time. And that's where I went. That's where I learned everything that I learned, and then applied my craft pretty much my entire career.
There you go. Yeah, quite a story there, especially Fort Lee. Great to hear. David, on your side, obviously you've been in the British Army, making that transition over, and now probably having 2 feet in both sides of the pond, per se. Can you kind of give us a background on yourself?
I will. I'll start by saying that, having known Kevin for a few years, that was a pretty modest summary of his achievements. There's a handful of people that others really listen to in and around supply chain, and Kevin's definitely one of them. My journey's been not the opposite, but certainly very different from Kevin's. I, coming out of Sandhurst, which is the sort of UK equivalent of West Point, joined the Royal Artillery and had the traditional officer progression of starting as a command post officer, gun position officer, and then ending up as a forward observer with the parachute regiment. In England, you say, you're with airborne, but I think with my accent, people think that I was in the Air Force or something, but they were the guys letting us out in the wrong place. So I don't want to make that mistake. So after 8 years, I I decided to leave, at which point came to New York, and frankly didn't have the kind of well laid out thinking and plan that Kevin had, and sort of stumbled into the world of back then was very early days around technology and databases and analytics, and got lucky, had the opportunity to get involved in a number of startups that were in and around the analytics space, a lot of it to do with risk, and eventually found my way to supply chain through a number of those companies, ultimately co-founding Everstream Analytics, which is a global supply chain risk management platform. So I think one of the things that I realized during my military career and since is that I am always surrounded by people who know more about whatever it is than I do. So having people like Kevin to learn from has been fantastic.
Absolutely. Great to hear, especially on that risk side of the house, right? We live it and have the burden of putting it on our shoulders every day in supply chain. So great to hear. Kevin, I want to stay with you on one more point here. And it's really about specifically to you continue your journey in supply chain. And there was a point that I heard that you actually had some choice and direction in your career in the Army. So that was good to hear, because the Marine Corps doesn't always give you that pathway. Hey, when you look at your military roots, right, and give some thought back to that transition period from active duty to the civilian world, obviously it's fraught with challenges, right, in terms of how we all transition into that new world for us. Can you describe maybe a particular challenge or challenges that you faced transitioning from a military career, right, where you spent almost 10 years, right, in the Army?
10 years.
Yeah, into that civilian workforce, right, and it's particularly that logistics component. Can you kind of lend some color to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the biggest challenge, or I guess I'll call it something I had to learn differently on, is the whole financial aspects of it and the whole kind of business aspect of it. I think what the military taught me really well is how to move things, how to supply soldiers, how to do all the basics and the core guts of supply chain. The one thing you really didn't have a lot of pressure on, I know there were budgets and things, but you really didn't think much about like a P&L statement. You didn't think about like how do you make money doing this, and how do you make sure that it all makes sense from a value exchange. And so when I first started off in a logistics company, I was the general manager of our automotive business and serviced the automotive folks over in Detroit. And, I not only had to run the supply chain, which I was very confident I could do, but I had to do it in the context of a P&L that had to be supported for the company I was working for, had to be right for them, and it had to be right for the customer in terms of making sure that my costs were right and those types of things. So, it was a quick learn, I guess, or something I had to learn quickly about how to do that. I think that was a big one. The second one I'd just say was in terms of building a talent base was really critical. I mean, in the Army, you essentially got the talent that was assigned to you. So as a company commander, I'm sitting in my company over in Germany, got probably 170 people in the company, and on any given day, 10 soldiers show up out of basic training, and hey, they're assigned to you. They're going to fill this role, and so then I had to manage and develop them. But in the civilian world, obviously, a lot of your attention has to go towards how do you select talent, how do you identify talent, how do you attract talent, and then for the great talent, how do you retain that talent? All of those things are not muscles, I'd say, that you exercise a lot on, at least in the general Army. Now, there are certain parts of the Army, Special Forces, Rangers. I know in the Navy, they talk about the nuclear Navy a lot, where that's a big part of what you do. But in the general population, you don't spend a lot of time doing that. So, and then what I learned really quickly was there's a lot of people out there that went through this transition and go through this transition, and you call on those folks, you ask them questions, you get their expertise and help, and you become a student again of certain things. So that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, great point. You get what you see. You take what you get and make what you want, right? In the
Yeah,
service. So, yeah,
that's right.
very true statement. David, I was thinking through, your journey there and some of the perhaps the characteristics that you developed in the military, and then how do you take those and develop them into either skills or characteristics that maybe brought more capabilities or made you stand out more within that transitional period when you left the military into the civilian world?
Yeah, it's. I mean, there's always a risk when you look at your life through the rearview mirror that you connect dots that maybe don't quite connect. I'll say that when I arrived in New York and got involved in the sort of tech startup scene, I didn't feel as if there was much of anything really that qualified me to do what I was doing. But as I look in the rearview mirror, I think that it is fair to say that one thing that, because of the variety of things that I had done in the Army, is adaptability. And I think that generally speaking, people get thrown in at the deep end in the Army, and you have to kind of you have to work it out. So I think my ability to adapt helped me a lot, although I might not have realized it at the time. I think perseverance is something. I'm not saying that this is unique to the military, but I think you do learn lessons about perseverance kind of because you have to. The benefits that you might not start out saying I'm perseverant, but you have to be to get through it, and you learn what you're capable of. You learn that the limits you thought you had, maybe you can actually go a bit further. And I think that helped a great deal. And the third thing I'd say is just going back to what I was saying earlier about every job I've had in the Army and since, I have known less about that and the environment that I was in than almost everyone around me. And I think young officers, at least in the British Army, and from what I could see, one of the biggest differences between success and failure is the willingness and the ability to listen to and learn from those around you. And I'm not as good at that as I want to be, but I try, and I think that's been helpful as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective that we all three have, right? We can look back and say, hey, this is really what helped create where we are today. So good points all the way around.
Yeah,
go ahead.
If I can, I just want to riff off of one comment David made about kind of what it takes to kind of be in the military officer and then end up in civilian world. There's actually a great book called Startup Nation. It's about Israel and being a startup, a lot of the startup companies, and it clearly credits service in the IDF and having to make independent decisions and quick decisions and things like that. Service in the IDF is a big proponent of why they are so successful with these tech startups. So just
good counsel right there, right? Got a reference to go back to now.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, right, in terms of our discussion today, when we think about that mentorship and community piece, I believe each of us, right, reaches back to those years in the military and either knowingly or purposefully draw upon our experiences, right? I think you both have just related that. And that in doing that, right, we meet the challenges we have in our professional lives on a daily basis. So I was thinking, Kevin, on your side, you've been an advocate for veterans in your professional life as well. Can you maybe talk to the importance of mentorship in your journey, and then both in the military world, what maybe you received there, right? And then also transitioning over to the civilian world.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. I am a really big believer in helping veterans transition into civilian world and hopefully coming to work for us. And I'll be honest, it's a little bit of a selfish item in that they become really superb and are really superb partners in the business with me. And so I actively seek that out. I think, what happens is you realize they've already kind of gone through a really detailed selection process, already done some pretty amazing things. And now it's a matter of getting them and helping them fit in where you're at. So So I work hard with, there's programs through the Chamber of Commerce, there's recruiting agencies. We actually send people to the various bases. We're based down here in Georgia, so the South kind of over indexes on military bases and things, and we send people to those bases on any given day. There's a lot of people that are exiting the military. They're either retiring or like doing what I did and deciding out. And so doing that. The other thing I do is anytime anybody, and it happens, I would say probably 4 or 5 times a year, someone might reach out to me on LinkedIn because they see my background and they're just, hey, I'm thinking of getting out of the military. Would you be willing to talk with me and everything? And I always say yes. Because I know that that's what really helped me when I got out. I had a network of people that I knew, that I called upon. They helped me kind of define my work in kind of civilian terms while not totally suppressing the military, but doing that, and also finding what I call military veteran friendly companies. And I don't think anybody's bad, but I tell you, there are some companies, hopefully we're one, and certainly seems like Redwood's one, companies that really spend time and effort putting together programs to help military people come into civilian life. I'm the executive sponsor for Shaw Vet, which is our Veterans Associate Resource Group. We have a big event tomorrow for Veterans Day, and we are constantly having events and things that are going on. And one final thing I would just advertise for is a few of us in the Shaw Vet ARG went to one of our business unit leaders, and we had a whole pitch deck together that said, we really want to help out this organization called Homes for Our Troops. They build homes for mobility challenged veterans, especially coming back from war zones and things. And we want to provide the flooring for all the homes they build. And I can go on and talk about them forever. But we had a whole deck. We thought we'd have to go through the financials. And I don't think we got 5 minutes into it. And the business unit leader said, I'm in, let's do it. Here's who to talk to. We'll move forward. So, it kind of tells you a lot about the company.
Yeah, that is great to hear, right? And that due diligence that somebody who maybe is transitioning out, that's a key point, right? If they can identify those, as you may have said, vet friendly, that helps that transitional period if they do get on board with that company. So great call out. David, on our side, when we introduced ourselves to each other on our earlier call, you had mentioned CSEMP, right? As an organization that really supports veterans in supply chain. Can you maybe add a little bit of color to that as well as elaborate?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think there are sort of 2 themes that come together around CSCMP. One is education and one is networking. And that's true in terms of its mission in general, but as it relates to veterans, they have a specific veterans program, and they offer the educational side and the networking side at a discount. I think in some cases it might be free for veterans. And it's a wonderful way for veterans to, on one hand, learn more about the industry and understand what it is that people do on a daily basis, but also to actually get into the industry and start to meet people and to network. And like Kevin, I was helped enormously when I left the Army by a network that I didn't really exist, because everyone I met with was like, oh, well, you should meet so-and-so and so-and-so. And you were just sort of, I guess that's the definition of a network. But it was huge in terms of feeling that I was supported. Oh, and by the way, it got me my first job. Like Kevin, when people reach out to me, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I think I got 4 requests just as a result of, the publicity around this particular webinar from veterans who'd like to connect and chat. And like Kevin, I'm happy to do that. It will take at least the rest of my life to repay all the help that I have been given. And back to your question, I think the way that CSCMP takes that and has a ready built network in a particular industry, arguably multiple industries, with numerous different roles, all of which veterans are extremely well suited for. I think it's great for the industry. It's a great thing that CSCMP does, and it's great for vets. So thanks for bringing that up, Brad.
Yeah, that going back here a few years, right? Thinking through my transition from the military to the civilian world. It was right when Gulf War kicked off in 90, well, after 90, but it was during that period of ramp up. And I didn't even know how to approach the market, to be honest, right? To do a resume that actually could, speak to the traits and characteristics and skill set that I had. So I found a person that helped me do that. And it was a great help and actually allowed me to get on, which back in the day was Yellow Freight back in 91 after the war was over. So great help for me, very critical point in terms of keeping in supply chain for my side. So very good advisement. Thinking through some industry specific components for us, David, on your side, unlike Mark and I, we kind of continued that career forward in logistics, right? Whereas you took a little bit different route and out of the Army and then found your way back into supply chain in terms from that risk perspective. You talked a little bit about some specific characteristics and skill sets, right, that you had in the military. Can you kind of maybe elaborate a little bit more on how some of that, one or two, that transformed yourself in that civilian world, right? That you can call upon each and every day, right, in your civilian world, that a veteran getting out of the service can know that they carry a certain characteristics and qualities that were engineered into them per se during their time in the service that carry forward a great value to a company in today's world.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think in some ways some of the most valuable skills, or perhaps I should say characteristics, that veterans have. And again, it's not to say that other people don't have them, but I think that something that is different about veterans is that they've seen some of these things work and in action, and sometimes in extreme ways. And people talk about teamwork, and there's a bit of a sort of, you can pay lip service to that. But I think people who've actually seen something achieved day after day that could never be achieved by an individual or even by half of the team that is achieving it, that to your point about sort of engineering in this idea of things that you don't know you're learning, but that you come out transformed. And I've certainly found that as an entrepreneur, understanding how to build a team and how to keep a team together and keep a team moving forward, and to understand the importance of understanding why are we doing it and what do we need to achieve, and trying your best not to tell people exactly how to do it. I think people outside the military have a tendency to assume that people in the military, they do what they're told and they get on with it. And sometimes that's necessary, but broadly speaking, and certainly in the modern military, the need for agility is critical, and that can't be achieved without what is sometimes called mission command, where you're not told how to do something, you're told what to do or what you want to achieve, but also you're told why, and that allows you to do it in a certain way that supports whatever else is going on around you. You don't need to know everything, but you need to know certain things to execute in a way that fits with the overall plan. And I think there's a lot of lessons there in terms of how to build a company, how to build a team, how to move forward, how to motivate people, and that whatever business you're in, however big or small it is, however big or small the team is quite literally the most valuable thing that anyone can do in any business. And I think people leave the military with not only that skill, but an appreciation for the power of that particular skill.
That's an outstanding point. Great point, actually. You think about the military side of the house, right? Especially when you look at the British Army. Small unit leadership has been tried and tested over centuries. And it's fundamentally there for reasons, right? And to your point about flexibility and call to action, it's really that small unit leadership that, pushes the mission forward. So great points there.
Again, I'm sorry, I want to jump off of something David said, because I think it's really important. And it made me think a little bit about what is one of the big advantages of or big skill set that a military person has that maybe they undersell too much, and that is in the U.S. Army we call it the commander's intent, where I when you talk to your boss in the civilian world, all that person needs to do is give you what their intent is, what their vision is, and then you can go execute that versus kind of being told, do this, and it's a skill set, and I hadn't thought of it till David mentioned it, but I think it's really good.
Mark or Kevin, I'm sorry, you just took my next question for you.
I'm sorry.
You answered it greatly, though. Thank you.
Okay.
That was spot on. Hey, we want to spin back over to maybe current affairs real quick here. Maybe a question, one or two for each of you. When we think about the challenges, and we have many in logistics, right? Always coming at us. David, on your side with your company, Everstream, you identify risk in the supply chain through greater visibility, right? You enhance that and say, hey, we see your potential challenge here. Given the recent natural disasters, especially the hurricane side, Western Carolina, to be even specific to that, Florida, of course. Can you lend your insights into the role that logistics plays in disaster relief efforts, right? What have you seen from your point of view on that analytics side? And then is there any military training components that enhance the ability to respond faster from a community perspective and maybe, obviously in the US from a FEMA perspective, right? Can you lend any insights on that?
Sure. Yeah. No, that's an easy one. I live and breathe this stuff. Well, I mean, the first thing I'd say is just in terms of how the military operates, supply chain risk management is no different because you got to understand the landscape, you got to understand the battlefield, you got to understand, what does my network look like, and then you've got to understand what would happen if various different things happen. We call it scenario planning in supply chain, and then it's a case of understanding the risk. I think people too often start with talking about the risk before they've talked about what do their assets look like, what are the things that they need to do, and what might happen. And then to add to that, the risks, it means that even if you're wrong or slightly wrong, at least you're prepared because you thought through the different options that you have. So I think the planning and the intelligence is an enormous part of it, and that's no different from the way that the military carries out their operations. I think the second thing I would say is that when it comes to disaster relief logistics, you are almost always operating in an environment where it is, to understate it, suboptimal. You have got assets that would normally be available that aren't, whether it's a road or a warehouse or whatever it is, and you've got to think on your feet. You've got to get around that, and you're often dealing with people who are themselves struggling physically, mentally, and that again has a lot of parallels with the environment that the military operates in or is training to operate in. So I think that it's there are an enormous amount of parallels. And before I end on this topic, I'll mention the organization that really sits in the middle of this, the American Logistics Aid Network, and their mission is essentially to coordinate logistics resources in North America after a disaster, such that if somebody has got half an empty warehouse and half an empty warehouse is needed to store water or something at that location, then Alan is able to connect the two and bring logistics assets and resources to bear following a disaster. So it's an important organization for anyone in logistics to know about.
Absolutely. When we think about when I go back into the Marine Corps world, you got the maritime pre-positioning ships. You've got inventory of equipment and everything else, right, staged around the world for different potential activities that would lend us to a conflict, right? And you can be prepared for those. But obviously, in the civilian world, inventory is not necessarily a good thing sometimes, right? We got just-in-time inventory. We got to balance out costs and things of that nature. So Kevin, thinking through your time as a quartermaster and some of those strategies that you guys deployed in the Army, what are some of the components that you can lend out to the audience here today that can carry over to that civilian world that perhaps was deployed in the military?
Well, from supply chain perspective and kind of policies and way you manage supply chains, quite frankly, it's not incredibly different. If you break down the Army supply chain, it starts obviously in the civilian world, making things, but then it goes to big national inventory control points. So think of those as kind of like your factory warehouses and those things. Then from the national inventory control points, it goes out to geographies, and from geographies, it goes out to units. And we did all sorts of things very similar to the civilian world. For example, we would plan all over Europe, where we were moving freight all over Europe, and we were constantly trying to figure out back hauls and head hauls and all of those same kind of things that we talk about. Now, I would say that in the military world, time was more valuable than a lot of things. So getting things a lot faster, getting things where they needed to be, probably stockpiling inventory a little bit more than maybe we do in civilian world was real, but was bigger. But I took all those things, I bring them back when I got out of the military and went into the civilian world, working automotive and logistics, for example. I kind of put the same lens on the, draw out their supply chain, put the same lens on it. And you're like, okay, I've seen this before. So what I'd encourage veterans to do is don't think like you're leaving one thing and you have to learn a whole new thing. Because when you come in, everyone says this in civilian logistics and supply chain all the time, is all of the policies and principles and all the things about logistics and supply chain all come from the military. So that's where it all started to begin with. Certain things have higher value than other things in terms of cost and time and those things. But that's what I learned. And as soon as I got comfortable with that, man, I started feeling really confident. Like I could talk about these things. I just use different words, but I could talk about them and keep up with the best of them. So
nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. We're going to wind down here now just with one last question to each of you. What's the one advice, mentorship that you can really speak to today that kind of gives somebody who's exiting the military, maybe it's a 4-year stint, or maybe it's a career that they're now leaving at the age of maybe 40, 42, right? Which just seems very, very young to me right now. Think about that. And what could you offer to them in terms of that transition? David?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say is have confidence. That can be difficult, but it's necessary and it's fair, because you should have confidence based on everything that the military has made you. Not overconfidence. That's a mistake that people sometimes make, but ironically, overconfidence probably sometimes comes because people aren't feeling very confident. So that's number one. Number two, I would say, is networking. I'm not saying the first person you call is going to give you a job. What I am saying is that every time you speak to someone, you will learn something, and they will help you in some way, and they'll probably pass you on to someone who can do exactly the same thing. And in my experience, you keep going, sooner or later, someone's actually going to give you a job. So I think number one, have confidence. Number two is just network as much as you possibly can. People want to help you.
Great points. Kevin?
David had two. Can I have two?
Yeah, absolutely.
These are in addition to what David said. So I 100% agree with everything he said. I would say a third one is, I believe it's still going on right now, but the education benefits coming out of the military are far better than they were when I got out of the military. Use them. There are incredibly good supply chain online degrees you can get. I'm a little partial to Tennessee. I love my Tennessee Vols, but there's other great universities as well. There's Penn State and Michigan State. I mean, you name them, they're out there. Top schools. They all have great online programs. I believe the benefits you have are incredibly good, if not covering 100% of the cost of it, which I did not have the ability to take advantage of. So I would definitely use those things. And then I'm going to, my second one, which is really like a 1A, it's not really a 2. It's a 1A, which I'm going to add on to David's, is, CSCMP, organizations like that, go to the conferences. Like, it's one thing to reach out on LinkedIn, definitely do that, do all those things, but go and talk to people face to face, go and be part of the discipline of supply chain. One of the things I just feel, looking back on it now, that's just been so great in my career is I started doing that right out of the military. And here I am, many, many years later, let's leave it at that. And I'm going back, I could keep going to those things. And now these people who are now CEOs of companies, everything, they're my friends, they're my mentors, they're people I grew up with in the business. And it's just been a great, great journey that way. So.
Outstanding. Great feedback, guys. Thank you very much. Just in closing, it's been great speaking with both of you, and I greatly appreciate your time today and allowing us to dive into that background of both of yours. So very much thanks for that. I would like to say a big call out to obviously all the veterans out there today and those who are serving on active duty. Happy Veterans Day. And then I got to make a special note to the Marine Corps birthday. Happy birthday, Marines. So thank you all. All right.
Thank you very much, Brad. Thank you for hosting us. Great idea.